Today we'll have tools we use to plan trips and things you can practice doing at home before you go. That's coming up on this episode 366 of WW Prep to Go. Hello and welcome to WW Prep to Go, where we talk strategy and ideas for people planning their Disney World trips. I am your host, Shannon Albert from WDWPrepSchool.com. Thank you for being here for episode 366. This is a standalone episode, just you and me. Going to talk through some things, namely some of the tools we use to plan or during our trips, as well as things that you can practice from home before you go to Disney World so that you don't have quite as many things to learn while you're on your trip. Before we get into that, I do always talk about housekeeping, including the fact that if you are wanting to be a trip report guest, you can submit that using the show notes in every episode. But I also wanted to mention today that we have some new functionality that I'm very excited about, and that is that we have an episode finder for the podcast. So at the end of every episode, I always say you can go to www.prepschool.com, click on podcast at the top, and scroll down to your episode. But I want to add to that when you click on podcast at the top, not only will it list all the episodes, but it also will break down trip reports by resort and by travel month. And then there are also episodes listed by travel style. So adults only trips, large groups, travel with little ones, ABDs, Disney cruises, international destinations, people that went to Universal, Run Disney, people that use the DAS system, split stays, food allergies or special diets, etc. So we have all of that listed. So when you go to the website, you can find that. I think that it will hopefully be really helpful. I think that we've been asked about this for years, and a lot of people are like, I just had a baby. I've never done this with a baby. I need to go and review all that information because maybe you didn't pay as close attention to it before it was your situation. Or I'm staying at a certain resort for the first time and you want to hear kind of how the transportation went or the food options there. So I think it'll be really, really helpful. And it'll be linked in the show notes, but you can always go to the website, www.prepschool.com, click on podcast at the top, and then all those different options will be listed there. Under the all podcast view that just shows all the episodes, just a reminder that the episodes all have very extensive write-ups about them. So they have article versions that are usually thousands of words long, and they have pictures, if they are trip reports especially, that are kind of thrown in, links to everything that's been talked about, as well as the audio from the episode. So it reads more like an article. It can be a really great reference after you maybe are wanting to go back and review it without listening to the whole thing again. So, or just look at the pictures of the people that are on the podcast. So anyway, lots of resources there. And it's taken some time to get all the episodes. We went back to July of 2020 and we had to get them all written up, which is a task, 3 years of episodes. And then they had to be tagged, and then we had to create the functionality to show all the different tags where we needed them to be. So hopefully that is helpful. I will be mentioning it more in the future, just as a reminder so that people can go and look for it there. I hope that many of you will find that helpful. Today, I wanted to talk about some tools that we use in planning our trips, because although, obviously we have a lot of information and knowledge about going to Disney World, there are still a lot of resources that we pull from in order to make our trips even easier. And also I wanted to mention things that you can practice from home, because oftentimes we will get questions. I do Instagram Q&As every Tuesday, and we get a lot of questions, for instance, about how much does a Lyft ride between X and Y cost? And I always tell people, this is something you can definitely look at from home. And so I just want to make sure we have all that information out there so that you're doing as much as you can before you even get to Florida. Let's start with the first tool, which is the Thrill Data website. It is thrill-data.com. Everything will be linked in the show notes here. The Thrill Data website is a data nerd dream. It is just a dashboard for every piece of information you could ever hope for about Disney World. And I've even seen some very experienced planners not realize everything that is there. So, examples of things that you can find on the Thrill Data website include basic things like the average wait time for an attraction, and that is based on Disney's posted wait times. So, if Disney is accurate or not is a whole other question, but they are tracking the history of what Disney has said the wait times are. They also have a lot of like virtual queue boarding group information. So if you, for instance, have boarding group 53 and you're like, well, what does that mean? What am I going to be called? You can go there and you can see approximately how many boarding groups per hour they get through. I think it's 13 per hour on Tron, but you don't have to take my word for it. You can go there and you can see kind of the average, which is super helpful. You can also see the history of the pricing on Genie Plus and individual Lightning lanes for the rides that offer it. So like if you're going next May, you can say, well, let's look at last May and see kind of what the Genie Plus individual Lightning costs were to help figure out maybe a budget for yourself. Who knows what it'll be like next May, but it might be helpful to you. And then, just wait times throughout the day. That's what we use to help us pull together, the best times to visit attractions. There's just so much information that it's just kind of, a data nerd dream. They also do have some other functionality beyond what I've just said, like they have their own version of dining alerts and things like that. Haven't tested those personally, but feel free to go there and test out all the different features. They have been adding things gradually over time, so there's always new things to check out. But that is the number one thing that I'm always surprised that a lot of people don't know about. So make sure that you look into it, thrill-data.com. Another tool that we use is another website has been around for decades at this point, I think, www.ent.com. The ENT stands for entertainment. Now, Disney did not used to do a very good job of posting when things were happening, particularly characters, but sometimes shows and things like that. And so www.ent.com was essential so that you could figure out when things were happening in the parks. It isn't as necessary anymore, but there are some things that are not listed in the My Disney Experience app or the Disney World website that will be found on www.ent.com. It's just a very basic free site that you can go to look up anything that you can't find in the app. They, I believe, update weekly, and I think they get their information from cast members about what this week's schedule looks like, and then they go and post it there. So it can be a great resource to add to the other information that is provided by Disney. Another one is mouse dining. I know a lot of people are going to already be users of mouse dining or other tools like it, like Mouse Watcher. We have a subscription to mouse dining for us. I know that the dining alert functionality is very popular. So obviously we do recommend that for any dining reservations that you can't snag on your own. But I also wanted to point out that mouse dining can be very helpful in just looking at availability in general for specific restaurants, and you can kind of see which days are sold out, which days still have like lunch available, but maybe not dinner. It's a great kind of dashboard, even if you don't pay for it, to see what is available. I really wish Disney did a better job at this, because if you, for instance, are like, you know what, I just booked kind of a last minute trip, I'm heading down in a few weeks, and so I know my dining options are going to be limited. It would be really nice to go to a website like this and just say, okay, does Space 220 have anything? Does Hollywood and Vine have anything? And you can just look at the month as a whole, and it'll tell you which days are currently sold out, which days have openings, at what times are available. So you can kind of pick and choose instead of having to do so much searching and trial and error on the Disney side itself. So even if you're not a paid member, just the view itself can be really nice to look at what dining options still have openings for your dates. But we do pay for it. I also noticed they had just added some additional things. Besides the dining alerts, they also have alerts for tours and for activities. So they really expanded beyond dining. I wonder if they regret having their name be Mouse Dining. But I know a lot of the tools are. So Mouse Watcher is another one that will search for all different things. I'm excited to see it expand beyond dining, because so many of the activities get booked up as well. So it's nice to have the alerts when openings pop up. So highly recommend Mouse Dining, even if you don't pay for it, because it can be a great reference tool. Next up on the list is festival related apps. So obviously, if you have followed for any amount of time, you know that we do go to the festivals and eat and drink all the food. But one of the things that we think is helpful for organizing the information are the festival related apps. So there are, if you go in the App Store, you can search for like Food and Wine Festival or Flower and Garden Festival. And these apps that are available, I think they're free. I don't remember paying for them. But they list all of the different food and drink options. And so then what I like to do is go through and mark what my favorite things were, because I get to try everything. And then if I go back on like a personal trip or on another trip during that festival, then I'll know to go back and reference those things. So it can kind of just be a helpful organizational checklist sort of thing. I really like it. There's just so much food and drink available. And so if you hear about, this being good or this being good, it's nice to be able to mark it and then know where to go to get that item during your trip. So definitely search the app stores for those to help keep your festival food and drinks organized. And the fifth tool that we use is Standby Skipper. And that is something we have talked about on here before. I really like not having to be on my phone quite as much during a trip and being able to just like have a conversation and not be refreshing constantly. Don't want to talk too much about that because we do have an upcoming episode that is all about Standby Skipper. And many of you have heard about it at this point because we've talked about it on here, that I wanted to make sure we included it on the list. Aside from those 5 tools that we use for our trips, I wanted to also just mention things that you can practice from home, because there are a lot of things you can do that you may not realize that you can do. And we see this come up a lot when we do like Q&As and things. People will be like, can you tell me this? And I'm like, no, you can do that when you are at home. So one of those things, first of all, download the My Disney Experience app if you haven't already. And then from there are several things you can do from home, although there will be some functionality that is not opened up until you're at Disney World. So for instance, something that you won't be able to see from home is the bus times at your resort. The bus times at your resort do not show up until you are at your resort, until you're checked in during your trip, and then that functionality opens up. Anything related to Genie Plus that relies on a purchase, you're not going to be able to see, but there are some things you can still see even if you can't see those particular pieces of functionality. One of them is that you can start to learn about Genie Plus and the tip board. It is a little bit confusing, and I think it's just helpful to kind of click around the tip board and see what the Genie Plus screens are that are available before you buy it, and that way there's a few less things to learn once you're there and have to learn all the new screens that get unlocked after you purchase it. Start to get to know as much as you can beforehand. Another thing you can do is you can test out mobile ordering, because listen, I'm going to tell you, when we need screenshots for mobile ordering, we just order food from home and pay for it. And we get all the screens that we need, and we can see, all the menus and all the options, and then we just don't pick the food up. You don't have to do that. No need to spend money, but you can go in and look at what the options are. You can see how the payment works in the screens. You can see the return times, all that kind of stuff. So testing out mobile order is definitely something you can do at home. Just don't put any credit cards in if you don't want to waste your money on food that you cannot pick up. Another thing you can do is you can walk through some of the virtual queue screens, or you can at least look at them and see kind of how they work. So I know it can be very intense the morning that you're joining a virtual queue before you get there, but you can do a little bit of that from home to familiarize yourself with it. Another thing you can do is something a lot of us do from home. We look at the wait times. A lot of people will be at home, open My Disney Experience, look at the wait times and think, oh, they're so low today, I wish I was there. Or the opposite, it's busy, I'm glad that's not me. But you can definitely check wait times all the time. It might be interesting for you to be able to watch trends like, oh, that thing didn't have a wait this morning, but it's very busy this afternoon, that kind of thing. It's just kind of a hobby for a lot of us. Another thing you can do is study park maps, particularly if you haven't been or you're not familiar with the layout of the parks. It can be helpful to have these somewhat memorized before your trip and they're interactive. So you can kind of zoom around. You can search for specific things if you want to find them on there. Another practice thing that is not my Disney experience is that you can practice using Lyft and Uber apps. Like I mentioned, a lot of people will ask us, how much does it cost to go from X to Y? You can put that in from home. I know that it defaults to your current location, but you can override that and just type in something. So when I want to look at like, how much would it cost to go from Pop Century to Epcot? I will just type in Epcot, change my origin to Pop Century, and see what the options are. If you plan on using minivans, you will want to open the Lyft app and do this same thing, and then you will see the minivan options listed there if you want to get pricing for that, as well as like the regular rideshare options. It is very, very helpful. One thing I noticed was this came up during an Instagram Q&A recently, was how long does it take to get from point A to point B on rideshare? And obviously you can use the regular Maps app to tell that. But I was surprised the rideshare apps themselves didn't have the estimates built in. So if you want to know how long it takes, for instance, to get from the airport to your resort, you can use the regular Maps app for that as you are just at home or on your phone. The last thing you can do from home is you can learn how to join the walk-up list. Some locations have walk-up lists, and so you can kind of just look at that in the functionality. Just as a side note, if the walk-up list during your trip says that it is full, never hesitate to go directly to a location and ask them if you can join the wait list, because they often have a separate queue that has nothing to do with the app. And so it may say that it's full, and then in the end, it actually is not, and they can add you anyway. So I feel like that was a lot of information covered very, very quickly, but this is a good balance to some of these longer episodes that are on the trip reports. If you have any suggestions, like other tools that you use, or any like functionality or podcast finder categories that you'd like us to add, don't hesitate to email info@wdwprepschool.com. For more information on this episode, please check the information in your show notes of your favorite podcast app, or head to the website wdwprepschool.com, click on podcast at the top, and scroll down to episode 366. Until next time, I'll see you on the site.